everyone, so back 10 hours later with an update. So I'm going to take my gummy butterflies out of the regular water and the salt water, and we're going to see how they look. And then we'll kind of just discuss the process of what happened. Hopefully this turns out well. Please don't let me make a mess. Okay, sorry, first things first. So just as a reminder, I know it's hard to see, but here's our original gummy, like pretty small, right? And now for our regular water. So there is no salt in this. Okay, so that's the water. Let me see if I can get the gummy to come out. Ooh. Okay, so the gummy is out. So I'm gonna just walk a little closer to the screen so that you guys can see for size comparison. So this is the regular gummy before being soaked, and here is the gummy after being soaked in water. So you can see that it's a little more puffy and inflated than the regular one. So that is for the gummy that was soaked in water. And okay, success. And then now for the one that was soaked in salt water. So I know I didn't really kind of go through the process, so let me backtrack a little bit. So based off of the process of osmosis and osmolarity, so you would expect that for the gummy in regular water that it should have water moving into the gummy, and for the gummy that is in salt water, theoretically, because it is a hypertonic solution, so water should be moving out of the gummy because the salt solution should be drawing water into it because it's a hypertonic solution. So let's just kind of go for round 2 and see how this worked out. Okay. So aside. See if I can do this without breaking the gummies apart, which has been the struggle of my life. Actually, I'll just leave them all here. And I will just try to hold up to the screen without dropping them. So I don't know if you guys can see that very well or not. So I have the original gummy and then the gummy that was soaked in regular water, this green one here, and then the gummy that was soaked in a salt water solution. Again, I don't know how much salt I had put in the water. I just kind of went with my heart, but you can kind of see that the saltwater gummy is still actually a little bit bigger than the regular gummy, but not smaller than the gummy that was soaked, or not bigger than the gummy that was soaked in regular water. Sorry, I went kind of out of shot there. So let me just kind of go through what happened. So basically, you know about osmosis, you know that water can flow pretty freely in and across a membrane, right? So basically what happened in this process is we have our gummy as our membrane, right? And you might remember this if, I don't know how far back high school was for some of y'all, but if you ever did the egg lab in high school where you soaked an egg in regular water and then different levels of salt concentrations. But basically for the egg that was soaked in regular water, i.e. the gummy that was soaked in regular water, it expanded because it pulled water into itself because it has a high solute concentration. And so solutes are like your proteins, your electrolytes, so your sodium, your potassium, your chlorine. Those are things that will draw water to themselves. And so that is why in a regular water solution, when you put a gummy in there that is such high solute concentration, it will draw more water into itself, and thus becoming the larger, more jelly-like consistency gummy that we kind of see here. And then for the gummy that was soaked in salt water, so it did not shrink, which theoretically the concept would be that for something that is soaked in a salt concentration, that it should shrink and be smaller. So I think because the gummy had such a high solute concentration on its own, when it reached a state of ionic equilibrium, so it did draw water into itself still because it has a higher solute concentration than the amount of sodium that I put into the solution. But at the same time, it did not take on as much water as the regular non-salted water butterfly did, because it still, the hypertonic solution still drew water out into itself until basically the gummy and the hypertonic solution reached a state of equilibrium or isotonicity. So fun fact, in terms of this experiment, so I think I mentioned in my introduction video, but I do work in an emergency hospital for veterinary medicine. And so one of the things that we will utilize, especially if we have a stat lateral case that comes into us, and so one of the things that we will utilize is hypertonic saline. However, to be specific, so we use hypertonic saline on our patients that have intracranial pressure. So intracranial pressure is some sort of blood buildup in the brain. So basically you have too much blood pressure in the brain that is causing some loss of function in your perception, brain function, motor skills. And so we kind of test that by testing whether or not they have a menace reflex. And so if they are aware of us coming at them, then we know, okay, they still have brain function. However, if they don't have that menace reflex, if they are not aware that we are approaching them, then we can gauge, okay, so they don't have a menace reflex, which means that they have some sort of loss of brain function. So this indicates to us that, you know, they likely have intracranial pressure. Now, the cause of that intracranial pressure could be a multitude of things. We oftentimes use this in our seizure patients, and for patients with seizures, a lot of times, especially if it's a recent onset seizure or if it's a breakthrough seizure, so if their seizures were already kind of managed using typical seizure medications, and then they suddenly had a breakthrough, so this could be caused by things like brain tumors, head traumas, cerebral hematomas, anything like that. And so in order for us to help them kind of regain some of that brain function / relieving that intracranial pressure buildup, we will use hypertonic saline and we will inject it IV. We generally give it over like 10-15 minutes. And so what that does is the hypertonic saline will increase the amount of solute in the bloodstream, and so that solute that is now in the bloodstream will cause the blood vessels to draw in water and, you know, excess fluids that may be floating in inappropriate spaces in the body. And so it will draw it back into itself, and as it's drawing that blood and, you know, interstitial fluid that shouldn't be, you know, out or is causing that pressure buildup, it'll help relieve that pressure because it's drawing the fluid back into the bloodstream and helping build up that blood pressure. And so that is a fun, at least for veterinary medicine, use of hypertonic salines and an application for this lab. I hope answered everything, all of the questions. So again, just to reiterate, we were just kind of going over what happens when you put a gummy in regular distilled water, or in my case tap water, versus putting it in a hypertonic solution, where in the regular water we definitely see that the gummy absorbed more water, became larger, and is pretty significantly larger than the original. Whereas the saltwater gummy, still slightly larger than the original, but did not take on as much water as the gummy that was soaked in regular water, just because already had a high concentration of solutes contained within the gummy. So it just kind of, it most likely exchanged water until it reached a state of equilibrium with the hypertonic saline that it was in, or solution. So hope that explains everything. Questions, comments, anything, feel free to comment below. And yeah, I hope everyone had fun doing this lab, and I hope you found my little fun fact interesting. I thought it was interesting because I honestly, for as often as I use hypertonic saline, I actually was able to go back and take the time to look at the actual mechanism of how hypertonic saline worked. I knew what hypertonic saline did, but it just gave me a little bit more in depth. So